The HR director slid the resignation letter across the mahogany conference table. My name was already typed at the bottom, waiting for a signature that would end 12 years of my career at Ashford Technologies. Across from me sat Kyle Brennan, our chief operating officer, arms crossed, expression carefully neutral, but eyes gleaming with something that looked like satisfaction. "This is the cleanest exit for everyone involved," he said. His voice carried that smooth executive tone, calm, reasonable, final. "Sign this, and you'll leave with a generous severance package and a mutual separation agreement. Fight it, and things get complicated. For you." The HR director, a woman named Paula Knox, nodded sympathetically. "We're trying to make this as painless as possible, considering the circumstances." What circumstances? They'd manufactured reasons over the past 6 weeks. Missed targets that weren't mine. Strategic disagreements that were actually his mistakes. Personality conflicts that translated to "doesn't worship Kyle enough." "You're finished here," Kyle said quietly, leaning forward. "Accept that with dignity." I picked up the pen, signed my name, stood up, walked out without another word. He thought he'd won. He had no idea what was actually happening. Let me tell you who I actually was at Ashford Technologies, because Kyle had spent months rewriting that narrative. I was Victoria Harvey, Vice President of Strategic Operations. I joined the company 12 years ago as a mid-level manager and built our entire operational framework for international expansion. I didn't play politics, didn't schmooze at executive retreats, didn't position myself as the loudest voice in strategy meetings. I just delivered results. Quietly, consistently, year after year. I'd led the Southeast Asia market entry that generated $43 million in first-year revenue. Restructured our supply chain, saving $17 million annually. Built partnerships with vendors that gave us preferential terms competitors couldn't match. Mentored 6 directors who'd gone on to VP roles at other companies. My performance reviews were flawless. My teams were loyal. Clients requested me by name. Board members knew my work, even if they didn't know my personality. I wasn't flashy. I was effective. And that was exactly what threatened Kyle. Because effectiveness without ego makes insecure leaders nervous. They can't control you with flattery or intimidate you with posturing. Your results speak louder than their politics. Kyle had spent 18 months trying to diminish me. Today, he thought he'd finally succeeded. Kyle Brennan was 47, handsome in that executive way, silver hair, expensive suits, confident handshake. He joined Ashford 5 years ago from a competitor, bringing impressive credentials and even more impressive presentation skills. Within 2 years, he was COO. The board loved him. He was charismatic in meetings, always had compelling narratives about vision and transformation. He spoke the language of disruption and innovation. He made everything sound urgent and exciting. But underneath the polish, Kyle was tactically brilliant at one thing: controlling narratives. He positioned himself at the center of every success, distanced himself from every failure, built alliances with board members through golf games and dinner parties, made himself indispensable not through results, but through relationships. He ran meetings like performances, knew when to pause for effect, when to use someone's first name to make a point feel personal, when to pivot blame so smoothly that people didn't even notice until later. And he decided I was a threat. Not because I challenged him directly, I hadn't, but because my results were concrete and his were theatrical. Because people trusted my judgment without him mediating it. Because I represented an alternative model of leadership he couldn't embody or control. So he'd set out to remove me. And he'd succeeded, or so it seemed. The signs had started 6 months earlier, subtle at first. I'd noticed Kyle rescheduling strategy meetings when I had conflicts, then making decisions without my input. Projects I traditionally led got reassigned to directors who reported through him. In executive meetings, he'd interrupt my updates with helpful context that actually undermined my points. He'd ask questions designed to make my work seem uncertain or incomplete. Nothing overtly hostile, just enough to plant doubt. My budget requests started getting scrutinized more heavily. Proposals I submitted needed additional review. Projects I championed got deprioritized in favor of Kyle's initiatives. He was systematically cutting off my resources and influence. Then came the credit dilution. A vendor partnership I'd negotiated became a team effort Kyle facilitated. A process improvement I'd implemented was reframed as Kyle's operational excellence initiative. My wins became our wins, became his wins. Colleagues started treating me differently, more cautiously. They'd CC Kyle on emails to me. They'd mention getting his approval before moving forward on things that used to be my decision authority. The organizational chart hadn't changed, but the actual power structure had. I watched it happen with growing clarity. This wasn't random. This wasn't about performance. This was a calculated campaign to marginalize me. And it was working. The final meeting happened on a Thursday afternoon. Paula from HR called me that morning, asking me to come to conference room C at 2 p.m. The tone was careful, professional, slightly apologetic. I knew immediately what it meant. Kyle was already there when I arrived. Paula sat beside him, a folder open in front of her. The resignation letter was on top. "Victoria, thank you for coming," Paula began. "This is a difficult conversation, but we need to discuss some concerns about your fit with the current strategic direction." Kyle took over smoothly. "You've done good work here. Nobody's questioning your past contributions. But the company is evolving. We need people who can collaborate effectively at the executive level. The feedback we're hearing suggests this isn't the right environment for you anymore." Feedback? From whom? Based on what? He didn't specify because he didn't need to. This wasn't about evidence. It was about power. "We're offering a generous severance," Paula said. 6 months' salary, continuation of benefits, and a mutual separation agreement. It's more than fair considering. Considering what? I asked calmly. Kyle smiled. Considering that fighting this would be unpleasant for everyone. This way, you leave with dignity and resources to transition smoothly. "You're finished here," he said. "Accept that with dignity." I signed, collected my badge, left. Walking out of that building, I felt strangely calm. Not defeated, not angry, just clear about what had happened and why fighting it at that moment would have been pointless. Here's what people don't understand about corporate power dynamics. Visible battles are almost always lost by the person with less institutional support. If I'd refused to sign, Kyle would have escalated, manufactured a performance improvement plan, documented fabricated issues, made my exit even messier. HR wasn't there to protect me. They were there to protect the company from liability. Fighting would have marked me as difficult, bitter, someone who couldn't accept professional realities gracefully. Future employers would hear about contentious departures, legal threats, burned bridges. Kyle had structural power, board relationships, budget control, narrative authority. Fighting him directly would have been professional suicide, not just at Ashford, but in the industry. He'd make sure of it. So I signed, let him believe he'd won cleanly, preserved my reputation as a professional who handled difficult situations with grace, gave him no ammunition, no drama, no narrative of a disgruntled executive making trouble. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. And my silence was about to become the most expensive miscalculation of Kyle's career. What Kyle didn't know, what he couldn't have known because he'd never bothered to understand how I actually worked, was that my value existed far beyond Ashford's walls. I'd spent 12 years building relationships across the industry. Not superficial networking connections, but genuine partnerships with executives at clients, vendors, competitors, and investment firms. People who'd worked with me directly, who'd seen my results, who knew my judgment was sound. I had data, real performance metrics from projects Kyle had taken credit for, documentation of decisions I'd made that he'd later presented as his own strategic vision. Not because I was paranoid, but because I was thorough. I kept records of everything. I had external reputation. When industry publications wrote about successful operational transformations, they quoted me, not Kyle. When conferences needed speakers on international expansion strategy, they invited me. Recruiters called me monthly with opportunities I'd always politely declined because I'd been loyal to Ashford. Most importantly, I had board member relationships that Kyle didn't know about. Not at Ashford, his territory was secure there. But board members talk to each other. They serve on multiple boards. They remember competent executives and quietly track careers. Kyle thought forcing my resignation ended my influence. Actually, it just freed me from the constraints of being his subordinate. The call came 3 days after I signed the resignation. I was at home, nominally on garden leave, though I'd already mentally moved on, when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Victoria Hayes. The voice was professional, female, direct. Speaking. This is Eleanor Vance. I'm on the board at Ashford Technologies, though we've never met formally. I'm also board chair at Paramount Dynamics. Do you have a few minutes to talk confidentially? Eleanor Vance. I knew the name. Venture capital background. Served on 6 corporate boards, reputation for identifying leadership talent and backing operational excellence. She joined Ashford's board 8 months ago. Of course, I said, sitting up straighter. I heard about your departure from Ashford. I want to be direct. I didn't support that decision, but I was outvoted. However, that's put you in an interesting position. Paramount is looking for someone to lead a significant transformation. Your name came up. Actually, your name came up from 3 different sources independently. I'm listening. Can you meet tomorrow? Confidentially. There's something we'd like to discuss that goes beyond a standard executive role. We scheduled lunch. I hung up feeling something shift. This wasn't just a job opportunity. Eleanor's tone suggested something bigger. Something Kyle definitely wouldn't expect. The lunch was at an upscale restaurant downtown, private room, just Eleanor and Paramount's CEO, Malcolm Torres. No recruiters. No HR. Just 2 people who made decisions talking to someone they believe could execute at the highest level. Malcolm was direct. We're planning a significant strategic shift. Expanding into markets we've never served, restructuring operations, building partnerships that will define the next decade. We need someone who's actually done this before, not someone who talks about it in board presentations. Eleanor added, we've reviewed your work at Ashford, the Southeast Asia expansion, the supply chain restructuring, the vendor partnerships. We spoke with people you've worked with. The consensus is that you're the rare executive who combines strategic thinking with operational excellence. We're not offering you a VP role, Malcolm said. We're offering you Chief Strategy Officer, reporting directly to me, with a board seat. Full equity package. 5-year contract. And this is the important part. You're being positioned as my successor. I stared at them. Chief Strategy Officer. Board seat. Succession plan. I'm 53, Malcolm said. I'm planning to transition to chairman in 3 years. The board wants continuity. They want someone who can lead operationally, not just strategically. Someone the organization will trust. Every reference we've checked says that's you. This wasn't just a new job. This was the career pinnacle most executives spend decades building toward. Being handed to me because I'd been forced out. Why me? I asked. You could recruit from anywhere. Why someone who just got pushed out? Eleanor smiled slightly. Because you got pushed out for exactly the reasons we want you. Kyle Brennan is a political operator. Brilliant at managing up, mediocre at actual execution. He saw you as a threat because you were effective without needing to be the loudest voice in the room. We've seen Kyle's type before, Malcolm said. They look great in board meetings. They sound visionary. But when you dig into actual results, you find that other people did the work while they took the credit. We don't want that here. We want someone who builds things that last, Eleanor continued. Your Southeast Asia expansion is still growing at Ashford 3 years later. Your supply chain work saved them millions annually. Those aren't flash-in-the-pan achievements. That's foundational work. Malcolm leaned forward. Here's what really matters. 5 different people we spoke with, clients, vendors, former team members, all said the same thing about you. She doesn't need credit. She just needs it done right. That's leadership. Real leadership. Kyle made a mistake pushing you out, Eleanor said. His mistake is our opportunity. And honestly, it's your opportunity to show what you can do without someone taking credit for it. I sat there processing. Everything Kyle had done to diminish me had actually freed me for something far bigger. I accepted the offer the next day. But I did something deliberate. I stayed absolutely silent about it. No LinkedIn announcement. No calls to former colleagues. No subtle hints or cryptic posts about new beginnings. I let Kyle believe he'd won. Let him think I'd faded quietly into early retirement or some diminished role at a smaller company. Let him feel secure in his victory. This silence was strategic for several reasons. First, I didn't want Ashford trying to counteroffer or create legal complications during my garden leave period. Second, I wanted Kyle comfortable, unguarded, making decisions without worrying about my next move. But mostly, I wanted him to have no warning, no time to prepare, no ability to craft counter-narratives or position himself defensively. When the truth eventually emerged, I wanted it to land with full impact. So I disappeared from view, returned congratulatory messages from former colleagues with vague thanks and non-specific mentions of exploring options, declined coffee invitations politely, stayed off social media entirely. Kyle probably checked occasionally to see what I was doing. Found nothing. Probably felt satisfied that he'd successfully eliminated a threat without significant fallout. Probably stopped thinking about me altogether. That was exactly what I wanted, because people are most vulnerable when they think they've already won. Meanwhile, I started at Paramount, though nobody at Ashford knew. My official announcement wouldn't come for another 6 weeks, timed strategically around board meetings and public filings. But I was already working, already building, already executing. And I started hearing things about Kyle. Through industry contacts, through board members who served on multiple boards, through the quiet networks where truth spreads faster than public relations. His confidence had grown dangerous. With me gone, he'd become even more aggressive about taking credit and centralizing control. He'd pushed out 2 other executives who'd quietly disagreed with his approaches. He was making increasingly bold promises to the board about growth and transformation. But the actual results were softening. The Southeast Asia operation I'd built was experiencing challenges because Kyle had reassigned my successor to a different role and hadn't replaced the expertise. Vendor relationships I'd carefully negotiated were deteriorating because Kyle treated them transactionally rather than strategically. Client satisfaction scores were declining. Not dramatically, not enough to trigger immediate concern, but the trend was unmistakable to anyone paying attention. Operational efficiency metrics were flat despite Kyle's claims of continuous improvement. He was succeeding at looking successful while the foundation quietly crumbled. And the board was starting to notice. Eleanor called me 6 weeks into my new role. The Ashford board is conducting a comprehensive review of executive performance and strategic direction. It's routine, happens every 18 months, but the timing is interesting given recent leadership changes. Interesting how? I asked. Several board members have been asking questions about operational metrics. Why certain initiatives Kyle championed aren't performing as projected. Why executive turnover has increased. Why client relationships seem strained. Nothing accusatory, just questions. And they're comparing current performance to historical trends. Your work keeps coming up as the baseline. When Victoria was leading this, results looked like X. Now they look like Y. Why? Kyle's having trouble explaining the gaps without admitting you were more effective than he is. She paused. There's going to be a special board meeting in 3 weeks. Full executive team attendance mandatory. Strategic review, performance assessment, discussion about future direction. Kyle doesn't know this yet, but it's not going to be comfortable for him. Am I attending? I asked, already knowing the answer. You're attending as a guest. Not as Ashford leadership, as Paramount's new CSO. We're announcing your appointment publicly 2 days before the meeting. The board wants Kyle to understand the full context of what's happening. This was it. The moment when Kyle would realize his victory had been hollow. When his narrative would collapse. When he'd understand what he'd actually done by pushing me out. The announcement went live on a Tuesday morning. Paramount's press release was straightforward but comprehensive. New Chief Strategy Officer. Board appointment. Succession planning. Extensive background highlighting operational achievements at previous roles, including Ashford. Industry publications picked it up immediately. Paramount Dynamics lands strategic hire after Ashford exit. The narrative was clear. I hadn't been pushed out because I was finished. I'd been pushed out, and someone smarter had immediately grabbed me for something bigger. My phone exploded with congratulatory messages. Former colleagues, clients, industry contacts. Many expressed surprise. They'd heard I'd left Ashford but hadn't known where I'd landed. The caliber of the role shocked people who understood corporate hierarchies. I didn't respond publicly, just thanked people privately and stayed focused on work. But I watched the ripple effects. LinkedIn showed me that Kyle had viewed my profile 3 times in one day. He'd seen the announcement. He was processing what it meant. The board meeting invitation arrived that afternoon. Formal. Professional. Requesting my attendance as an industry peer and board member of a partner company to discuss strategic alignment opportunities. Translation: they wanted me in the room when they evaluated Kyle. Wanted him to see exactly what he'd let walk away. Wanted me there as a living reminder that competence doesn't disappear just because you force someone to resign. 2 days later, I drove to Ashford's headquarters for the first time in 8 weeks. Walking into that building felt surreal. I'd left as someone being pushed out. I was returning as chief strategy officer of a competitor with a board seat and a succession plan. The security guard's expression flickered with recognition and confusion before he processed my visitor badge. The board meeting was in the same building where Kyle had forced my resignation. Different floor, different room, but the symmetry wasn't lost on me. I arrived early, deliberately. Wanted to be settled, calm, projecting quiet confidence when others entered. Board members filtered in. Several greeted me warmly, congratulated me on the paramount appointment. Eleanor introduced me to members I hadn't met before. The CEO, Nathan Pierce, shook my hand with something that looked like regret in his eyes. Then Kyle walked in. He saw me and stopped. Just for a second, but everyone noticed. His expression flickered through several emotions: surprise, confusion, calculation, concern, before settling into a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Victoria," he said, "congratulations on your new role." "Thank you, Kyle." He took his seat across the table. I watched him process the room dynamics. Saw him realize that I wasn't here as a former employee. I was here as a peer. Actually, given my board seat, potentially more than a peer. His smile faltered slightly. Just enough. The meeting began with routine business. Financial reports, market updates, strategic initiative reviews. Kyle presented confidently, using the same polished style that had always worked for him. Compelling narratives, bold vision, urgent calls to action. But this time, something was different. Board members were asking sharper questions, requesting specific data, comparing current metrics to historical performance. The tone wasn't hostile, just more rigorous than Kyle was accustomed to. "The Southeast Asia revenue is down 11% year-over-year," one board member noted. "Can you explain that decline?" Kyle pivoted smoothly. "Market conditions, currency fluctuations. We're implementing corrective measures. But Victoria built that operation to handle exactly those variables. Why is it suddenly vulnerable to standard market dynamics?" Pause. Kyle's smile tightened. "Business evolves. We're adapting the strategy she built to new circumstances." "Adapting how?" He gave a detailed answer that sounded impressive but said nothing concrete. I watched board members exchange glances. They were seeing what I'd seen for months: style over substance. Then Eleanor asked the question that changed everything. "Kyle, can you walk us through the vendor partnership strategy? Specifically, why are we experiencing pricing increases from suppliers that previously gave us preferential terms?" Kyle started explaining competitive dynamics and market leverage, but his explanation directly contradicted the actual negotiation strategy I'd built. He didn't know it, but he was describing exactly the wrong approach. I said nothing, just watched. The questioning intensified. Another board member asked about operational efficiency metrics. Kyle provided figures that sounded positive until someone compared them to the same period 2 years ago when I'd been running operations. "We've added 17% more staff, but efficiency has declined by 8%. How does that math work?" Kyle explained something about strategic investments in capability building, but the numbers didn't support the narrative. Costs were up, output was down, and his explanation made it worse by suggesting this was intentional. Nathan, the CEO, asked about client retention. Kyle cited overall numbers that looked acceptable, but Eleanor had done her homework. "I spoke with 3 of our largest clients last week. All 3 mentioned missing their primary contact, which was Victoria. They said the relationship feels more transactional now." "How are we addressing that concern?" "We're building new relationships," Kyle said. "Transition periods are natural, but these clients have been with us for years. Why are we treating them like new accounts?" Because Kyle didn't understand relationship management, I thought. He understood transactions, not partnerships. But I didn't say it. I didn't need to. The board was reaching that conclusion themselves. Kyle's confident presentation style was eroding. His answers were becoming more defensive. His usual smoothness was fragmenting under sustained scrutiny, and everyone in the room could see it happening. Then came the question that ended him. Nathan asked it, but Eleanor had clearly set it up. Kyle, who's running the operational review you presented last quarter? The comprehensive assessment of supply chain efficiency that you said would deliver $15 million in savings. Kyle blinked. That's being managed by the operations team, under whose direct leadership I'm overseeing it personally. But your COO, that's a hands-on operational analysis. Who's actually doing the work? Silence. Because the answer was nobody. That project had been something I'd been developing before Kyle pushed me out. He'd presented my preliminary findings as his initiative, but never actually staffed it. It existed only in his presentation deck. We're in the planning phase, Kyle said. Assembling the right team. You presented it as active work 3 months ago. You projected Q3 results. Are you saying it hasn't actually started? The room went completely quiet. This wasn't just a gap in execution. This was fabrication. Kyle had presented work that wasn't happening, taken credit for results that didn't exist, and nobody had verified it until now. Kyle tried to recover, mentioned resourcing challenges and strategic reprioritization. But the damage was done. Everyone understood what had happened. He'd been presenting fiction and hoping nobody checked the details. Eleanor glanced at me. I maintained my expression, neutral, professional, giving away nothing. But inside, I felt cold satisfaction. This was consequences. Natural, inevitable, undramatic consequences. The meeting shifted. It wasn't sudden or dramatic, but I felt the power dynamics change in real time. Board members stopped asking Kyle questions and started making statements. Observations about declining performance. Concerns about strategic direction. Questions about whether current leadership was aligned with company needs. Kyle tried to maintain control. Defended his decisions. Emphasized long-term vision over short-term metrics. But his usual confidence had evaporated. He was reacting, not leading. And everyone noticed. Nathan asked me a question. Victoria, from your new vantage point at Paramount, how would you assess operational excellence in our industry? It was a setup, obviously. A chance to contrast my approach with Kyle's. I answered carefully, professionally, focusing on principles without making it personal. I talked about sustainable partnerships over transactional relationships. Long-term capability, building over short-term appearances. Results over narratives. I never mentioned Kyle by name. Didn't need to. Every principle I outlined was an implicit contrast to how he operated. The board members understood perfectly. That's consistent with how you operated here, Nathan said. Those principles built our Southeast Asia operation, restructured our supply chain, established vendor partnerships that gave us competitive advantage. Past tense. Built, restructured, established. Before Kyle. Before things started deteriorating. The implication was devastating because it was factual. Kyle sat frozen, watching his credibility disintegrate, unable to defend himself without admitting I'd been more effective. Unable to attack me without looking petty. Trapped. Eleanor looked at Nathan, then at the board members. I think we need to discuss executive succession planning, particularly the COO role and its alignment with our strategic priorities. Kyle's face went pale. Succession planning was board code for "we're replacing you." Nathan nodded. I agree. Given current performance trends and the operational challenges we're facing, we need to reassess our leadership structure. Another board member. I'd like to propose that we engage an executive search firm. Bring in external candidates with proven operational track records. Kyle tried to speak. I think. This isn't about you personally, Nathan said gently, which was the corporate equivalent of this is absolutely about you personally. It's about ensuring we have the right structure for where the company needs to go. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes. Technical discussions about transition timelines, search parameters, interim arrangements. Kyle sat silently, understanding that his career at Ashford was effectively over, even though nobody had said it explicitly. I maintained my professional expression, answered questions when asked, offered insights on operational leadership qualities when requested. But mostly, I just watched Kyle experience what I'd experienced 8 weeks ago, the professional death that happens in conference rooms with HR language and careful phrasing. The difference was, I deserved better. He'd earned this. The official announcement came 3 weeks later. Kyle was stepping down to pursue other opportunities. The COO role was being reimagined, with a search underway for someone with operational depth and execution experience. He left with a severance package. No drama. No public accusations. Just a quiet exit engineered by lawyers and HR professionals who specialized in making problems disappear cleanly. I heard through Eleanor that the board had given him the same choice he'd given me: resign gracefully or face increasingly uncomfortable scrutiny. He'd chosen resignation. Smart choice. The alternative would have been far worse. His LinkedIn profile changed rapidly. COO became former COO. Then, executive consultant. Then just a vague list of past roles with no current position. The same professional erosion I'd watched happen to other executives who'd been pushed out. Some people posted supportive comments on his announcement, but conspicuously absent were comments from board members, senior executives, or anyone with real industry credibility. That silence spoke volumes. Everyone knew what had happened, even if nobody said it directly. Kyle had controlled narratives brilliantly for 5 years. But eventually, narratives have to match reality. And when they don't, reality wins. Always. I never posted anything. Never made statements. Never contacted him. I just continued building at Paramount, focusing on work that would speak far louder than any commentary. 6 months into my role at Paramount, we completed a strategic partnership with a major international distributor. The deal gave us access to markets we'd never served and established us as a serious player in regions previously dominated by competitors. It was the kind of operational achievement that defined careers. Malcolm credited me publicly. The board acknowledged it formally. Industry publications wrote about it as a model of strategic expansion. Everything Kyle had claimed to do, build partnerships, expand internationally, create competitive advantage, I was actually doing. Not talking about, actually executing. And people noticed. A board member from Ashford called me, not officially but personally. I wanted you to know we made a mistake. We should have protected you better when Kyle started his campaign. The company has struggled since you left. I appreciated the acknowledgement but didn't need it. I'd already moved past Ashford. They were a chapter in my career, not the defining chapter. What mattered now was building something at Paramount that would last. I learned something important from that experience, I told him. That your value isn't determined by who recognizes it. It's determined by what you build. Kyle could control the narrative at Ashford, but he couldn't control reality. Reality caught up eventually. It always does, he said quietly. Looking back now, I can see the contrast clearly. The day Kyle forced my resignation, I'd felt powerless. Watching him smile while HR processed my exit. Hearing him say I was finished. Walking out with a security escort like I'd done something wrong. Now I sat on a board, led strategy for a company positioned for explosive growth. Had a succession plan that would make me CEO within 3 years. My team was loyal, my results were concrete, and my reputation was stronger than ever. Kyle had believed pushing me out would end my career. Actually, it had freed me from constraints I hadn't fully recognized. From having my work attributed to someone else. From political dynamics that rewarded performance over substance. From an environment where I had to fight for credit that should have been automatic. At Paramount, I didn't have to fight for anything. My work spoke for itself. Malcolm trusted my judgment. The board valued my insights. My team knew I'd protect their contributions. I'd build exactly the leadership environment I'd always wanted by being forced out of one that didn't deserve me. The irony was complete. Kyle's biggest success was destroying his own career while launching mine to heights I might never have reached at Ashford. People ask me sometimes what I learned from being pushed out. Whether I regret not fighting harder. Whether I wish I'd handled things differently. The answer is no. Because fighting Kyle directly would have been a public battle I couldn't win. He had institutional power, board relationships, narrative control. Visible confrontation would have damaged me more than him. But patience, documentation, letting reality speak. Those were weapons he couldn't defend against. His entire career was built on appearance over substance. The moment someone looked closely at actual results, his foundation crumbled. I learned that power isn't about being loud. It's about being right, about building things that last, about having your work speak louder than anyone's narrative about your work. I learned that competence outlasts politics. Always. Eventually. It might take time, but boards figure out who delivers results versus who delivers presentations about results. Most importantly, I learned that being underestimated is sometimes an advantage. Cal thought pushing me out eliminated a threat. He never considered that it might free me for something bigger. That other people were watching. That boards talk to each other. That reputation travels faster than politics. He focused on winning internally and lost externally. I accepted losing internally and won everywhere else. Cal told me I was finished. Those exact words. "You're finished here." Spoken with absolute confidence by someone who believed he controlled my professional future. He was right about one thing. I was finished at Ashford. But he was catastrophically wrong about what that meant. I wasn't finished. I was freed. Freed from working under someone who took credit for my work. Freed from an environment that valued style over substance. Freed from constraints that had limited what I could build. 3 years later, I'm CEO of Paramount Dynamics. Malcolm transitioned to chairman exactly as planned. The board voted unanimously. The company has doubled in size. The partnerships I've built define our industry position. Kyle. Last I heard, he's doing consulting work. Probably presenting well in client meetings. Probably still charismatic and polished. Probably still taking credit for other people's work. But his trajectory peaked the day he pushed me out. Mine was just beginning. I learned something profound from that experience. The most dangerous person in a room isn't the one who talks loudest or controls the narrative. It's the one who stays quiet, builds real things, and lets results speak. They told me I was finished. They just didn't know who was deciding. Turns out it wasn't them. It never was. Competence decides. Reality decides. Time decides. And all three decided in my favor.